It's 3 minutes after 8. You're listening to Natasha Devon here on LBC. And it's been reported today that activists from the group Just Stop Oil have managed to infiltrate a plant near Birmingham and have said we'll be here as long as we can after climbing on top of the facility as part of a series of dawn protests. They've also climbed on top of an oil tanker at Grays Terminal in Essex and targeted the nearby Navigator Terminal in Thurrock. Now, this is the fifth day of activism from these protest groups, which have caused significant disruption. Yesterday, dozens of Extinction Rebellion activists glued their hands to the London HQ of Shell, whilst hundreds marched on Buckingham Palace. A video shared by Extinction Rebellion shows two activists with their hands down on the reception desk with the logo of the oil giant Shell visible in the background. Other pictures show three people holding signs saying "Insiders Wanted." One protester said, "We really hope one day these strange Homo sapiens will realise that they are actually effing everything up, including their own lives, and they will turn around to the government and say, no more, no more." However, these protesters have been described as eco-zealots in today's Daily Mail. And some of the comments underneath the article, which I cannot recommend reading, but I did on your behalf, so you didn't have to as a research exercise, show a distinct lack of empathy for the cause or for the people who are activists for the cause. "Got any snipers?" says one user. Another says, "Arrest them for obstruction, custody to court, no release on bail as liable to reoffend. Do these people not realise that their actions are turning the public against being green?" And those two comments pretty much sum up the sentiments of the almost 5,000 people minded to comment on the article. But my question to you today is this. There's more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere than at any time in human history. Sea levels are rising faster than ever before. Average wildlife populations have dropped 60% in just over 40 years. Extreme heat events have become more frequent and more severe, and that will only lead to more displacement of people. We've just done an hour on refugees. We're going to see more refugees, more desperate people seeking asylum because of these climate events. 2/3 of extreme weather events in the last 20 years have been proven to be caused by the influence of humans. So this is an urgent, literally life and death issue. And the time to address it is now. We're in the window where we can do something about it. If the government are refusing to take the action needed and people are refusing to get their heads out of the sand, what else are these protesters supposed to do? You may disagree with their tactics. You may find them annoying and inconvenient. And you may very well agree that they do more harm for the cause than good. But what's the alternative? And don't say to me things like write to your MP, because they will have done that. They will have thought of that. They will have done a petition and all the other things that activists do. And it won't have made a difference. And this is urgent. So how are they supposed to raise awareness without causing inconvenience? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850, tweet at LBC. Well, we're joined now by Louis Mckinney, who is a student and supporter of Just Stop Oil. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, you, of course, are most famous for, you used, was it a cable tie to attach yourself to the goalpost of a football match at Everton v Newcastle at the end of last month? And you've talked about how you felt like the most hated man on the planet and you received death threats after doing that. Do you feel like you changed any minds that day, either people in the stadium or people who were maybe watching the game at home?
I certainly hope so. It's hard to tell. We don't get metrics for this stuff in real time. Honestly, it's impossible to tell. But the fact is, those people in that stadium, people of Britain, people of the world, have a right to know what's coming. They have a right to know their government is lying to them. Their government is marching them to the chopping block and expecting them to walk. And I'm not willing to do that. And I think if these people understand how much the government has been lying to them, they won't march either.
And I promise I will give you the opportunity to tell me exactly what you mean by that in just a moment. But I'm interested to hear first what you would say to those people who say your tactics are actually turning people off from the cause rather than raising the awareness that you want to raise.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to be popular for this to work. How this works is we make a demand of the government and we make such an annoyance that they have to protect our lives because there's no other option for them. It's either we hurt their wallets or they don't do anything. If we weren't doing our tactics, I wouldn't be on your show right now. I wouldn't have this voice I currently have.
Okay, so it's a combination of getting the attention of the media, but also hitting the government in their pocket. So actually, you're not trying to be popular with the public, is what you're saying?
No, we don't care about popularity. I'd be happy to be the least popular man in the country if it means I get to save the lives of my loved ones.
And can you tell me, Just Stop Oil, what is it that you are asking the government to do and in what time frame?
We demand the government stop all new fossil fuel licensing and consents on the spot. That doesn't mean we're saying turn off the taps you already have. We're saying stop building new ones.
Okay, and have the government given you any indication that they're listening to that message?
Yeah, I think Priti Patel called us annoying or something. To be honest, I don't really listen to her. She just generally, throws stuff at us to discredit us without actually addressing our demand, without actually addressing the fact that if we don't just stop oil, her kids will be fine. They have a lot of money. The 99% will starve. She never talks about that, brushes it under the rug, and I'm not all right with that.
And to the 99% who are listening this evening, who perhaps don't understand how urgent this problem is, what would your message be to them?
Your government is selling you out. Every new fossil fuel license, they're selling out your lives, your children's lives. Either you act now and stop them, or you watch your children starve down the line. The government aren't your friends. They're not doing what's in their best interest. They'll happily watch you die for a paycheck. And you should be angry.
Thank you. Louis McKinney there, student and supporter of Just Stop Oil. And it's interesting what he said about the rich not really having to worry about this. I read the Extinction Rebellion Handbook, which is very short, and I very much recommend it. There's about 20 essays from prominent people who really know of what they speak within that handbook. And one of them is by a guy who was actually asked by some multi-millionaires to attend a meeting. And their question to him was, how do I use AI? That was his specialism, artificial intelligence. How do I use AI to ensure that I can continue having this lifestyle, that me and my family can remain safe, when inevitably all the people that are working for me either turn on me or die or are fighting over scraps of food because they recognise that this climate crisis is inevitable. And they are working very hard to find ways to ensure that it doesn't affect them, whilst not thinking about how it will affect the 99%. So he was right, I think, to make that point. My question to you is, as the 99%, why don't we speak about this more? Why aren't we talking about it all the time, every single day? And how do we ensure that that happens? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. And Alan has called from Manchester. What would you like to say?
Hello, yes. I've been taking part in some of the actions with Just Stop Oil. And yeah, I kind of wanted to address the point of sort of popularity. I mean, back at the height of the civil rights movement, a survey was done, and 70% of black people were asked. 70% of people asked came out as being against what Martin Luther King was doing because they thought it made them look bad.
Right.
So and the suffragettes were regarded as terrorists, the ANC were regarded as terrorists, and we now look back and say, okay, they were visionaries, and they created a lot of social change. So that's kind of where we're at. We know we're not going to be popular. It's not a popularity contest. We need fundamental change, and our government are doing the exact opposite of what they need to do.
Do you think that there's a kind of arrogance associated with the attitude of, well, if you carry on like that, you're not going to win me over to your cause? Because that seems to be the attitude that a lot of people have taken to the activism that's happening.
Yeah, it really is, and it isn't about that. We're not about blaming and shaming. We're not about trying to be popular. So it's it goes both ways. It's the government needs to change. It's not individuals. We're not trying to win people over. We're just trying to get the government to take the necessary action.
And do you think that there's an argument to say that, for example, when Priti Patel brought in the new policing bill, which gave police greater rights to disrupt protests, to arrest people at protests, it was eco-protesters that she cited as the reason that she was doing it, and was much of the reason that that bill had such popular support. So is there an argument to say that actually you're not winning the government over with these tactics, you're just making them go in harder on jailing you, essentially?
Oh yeah, they obviously they want to shut us down because we're successful. We're hitting them where it hurts, and that's the whole point of doing these actions. We're having an effect, and because of that, they don't like it, so they want to shut us down. We have a right to peaceful protest in this country, and it's we're signed up to the European Bill of Human Rights. And regardless of whether we're part of the European Union or not, that's something we're signed up to. We're signatories to that, so we have a right to do that. And
not if Dominic Raab has his way, but yeah, I take your point. Thank you so much, Alan, for your call. And that really has, in the first quarter of an hour of this discussion, has changed my view on this, that this actually for the protesters is not about being popular. It's not about winning over public opinion. This is about hitting the government where it hurts, causing maximum disruption to force them to at least engage with what they're saying. Do you think that that is the correct tactic? And if you don't, what else are they supposed to do? Do you recognise how urgent and dangerous and scary the situation that humanity is in right now? And to be clear, the planet will be fine, but humanity will die out if we continue the way that we're going. And we shouldn't be okay with that. So I wonder if we do want to get more people engaged with this, more people talking about it, more people making responsible decisions about what industry they support, because I take the point that as individuals, there's only so much that we can do. But if we use our people power to ensure that businesses who don't have ethical practices go out of business, then that's surely something that we can all get behind. But how do we make that happen? And now we're on day 5 of protest tactics such as gluing themselves to things, climbing on things, creating disruption by Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. I'm asking you, how effective do you think these tactics are? And if they aren't effective, what's the alternative? And the number to call is 0345 6060 973. Julian has called from Lutterworth. What would you like to say?
Hi. I find that I agree with most of the things that the protesters want to achieve. I just think they're doing completely the wrong way about it. As you've mentioned earlier, or somebody else mentioned earlier, it's actually turning people off. It's not really hurting the government. It's hurting people who are trying to get to work or trying to get heating oil for their houses, for example. But what they need to do is do something positive. So be that, instead of complaining about the government, be the government, stand for elections. Tell people and probably help people to actually not only realise what the issues are, but how can they do their bit to do something about it. I appreciate it takes the government to do things as well, but we can all do things, be that insulate our own homes or, how can we be more efficient? What other things can we do?
Do you think... I'm trying to imagine what their response would be to what you're saying. And it would probably be that these things take more time than the planet has to stand for election, to educate individuals. And bearing in mind that something like 80% of the climate change, the gases, etc., responsible for climate change are coming from industry as opposed to individuals, that it's more effective to go directly to the people in power.
Yeah, well, I think what they would say is, because I've tried to communicate with some people on social media, they'll say, we've tried all of that and it doesn't work. But they haven't tried all of that. They've done certain things for sure. But right now, for example, I think, using the example of the people's motivation to help people out of Ukraine, for example, people power has got a lot more power than I think people appreciate. So if you could tell me, if it's industry, then tell me which industries or which companies or which people do I need to boycott, which supermarkets do I need to boycott, which products do I need to boycott. And actually, you can actually make things happen like that. But what you need to do is allow people to be informed about what they can actually do.
But I guess the difficulty there is, if, for example, we don't have wind farms, which at the moment we don't have sufficient efficient wind farms to power the country. That makes us reliant on oil. So these big decisions about where, for example, our energy is coming from do lie in the hands of government, don't they?
They do to a point, yes. I mean, absolutely. It's both. But I think if you can do positive things, you get people on side, you bring people with you, and those other people then, so not just the protesters, but other people will come along with you. I mean, ultimately, I think you get to a point where you almost like shame the government into doing something. You just get more momentum behind you. I just think positivity always outweighs negativity when it comes to making any change.
Thank you, Julian. You remind me of... We were talking about the protests against conversion therapy for transgender people last weekend on the show, and 3,000 people showed up to protest, which is not an insignificant number of people to actually come along in person to a protest. And somebody who attended said, I just feel like the government can't ignore this. And I found myself thinking, they will try, though. So doesn't that place protesters in a position where they have to do something that the government can't ignore? But then on the other hand, I'm sure the government don't want to be seen to be rewarding this type of behaviour. So it is really difficult. And I wonder what the solution is. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Luke has called from Ashford. What would you like to say?
Hello, good evening. I just wanted to voice my concerns in relation to the climate crisis. I find it just terrifying, and I almost feel like I've got two alter egos in relation to kind of facing up to it and recognising the issues that we have. On one hand, I go about my daily life, I go to work, I enjoy the here and now, and kind of have that capitalist mindset, which you could say has contributed to the problem. I absolutely 100% do not condone any breaking of the law. I do think, however, that there does need to be drastic action, and how we do that, whether legislation is enough, I don't know. Going back to one of your previous callers and talking about people power and, the power of money being able to influence government. Most people, I would say, are not very flush. There is a very, very good website called Ethical Consumer, and basically that does all the work for you. It basically scores companies and organisations out of 20 for how good they are to the environment, to people, etc. However, the only thing is that to do that and to support those businesses, you are paying an awful lot more money for those products and to support them. And I do think that would put an awful lot of people off that are on a very tight budget and are struggling.
And you make a really good point, because then isn't it then the government's job to impose regulations on business, which means that they have to achieve a certain ethical standard before they're allowed to trade in our country, rather than putting the responsibility on individuals who already are stretched, as you quite rightly say, and say, well, it's your fault for indulging in fast fashion, or etc., when they don't have the money to buy anything else?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, you could liken it to the smoking ban and sort of the number of people that have stopped smoking. I mean, like you say, I've done other things. I have written to the local MP, and basically I was told that the government's target of 2050 for net zero was the fine for avoiding most damaging climate change. However, reading the the IPCC report recently, and the reaction from the UN shows that we've got a few years left. And sort of likened to other callers, this isn't something, and I think as well from supporters of action, I don't think it's helpful to say, the rich, and that this is something that affects everybody. I will let you make that point, I promise. But when I say the rich, what I mean is the 1% that are millionaires and billionaires. I don't mean people who have just done well for themselves. And that's important not to misunderstand me. This will affect 99% of humanity, apart from the people that can afford to build themselves some kind of luxury bunker and exist with AI servants. Yeah, no, absolutely. A bit like don't look up, really.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, what were you going to say, Luke?
Basically, yeah, I mean, I'm in a really, I've had a very lucky and privileged life, and I'm in a situation where I can do things. I can plant more trees. I can, try and have an element for that. However, the government legislation is not there to maximise it. I think most recently there was some guidance out with regards to rewilding. And basically it only applied to landowners or holdings of 500 hectares, so 1,000 acres, which, I mean, that's enormous. I mean, would it not make more sense to encourage people to look after small holdings, and aren't they more likely to have less invested in kind of very aggressive agriculture? I don't know. It does.
It's almost like they don't actually care, isn't it, Luke? Thank you so much for your call. Harry has called from Bristol. What would you like to say?
I just want to say that I think the key thing with this protest is that the issue with them is that I don't see any evidence that they're actually gaining more support with the public. And if that isn't the point of the protest in order to drive change, then what's the point? If you wanted to protest...
The protester that we had on said that they're not there to gain popularity with the public. They're there to make the government sit up and pay attention. But I don't see any evidence that they have enforced any change in policy either. And that's the problem with that argument, isn't it?
Well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So if you're saying that you want the government to take action, then do protests that actually affect the government. What you're doing by sticking yourself to an LBC studio, or there's been other protests where it's been things in the road and stuff. You're stopping people that could potentially support your cause in spite of the government. So that's why I just don't think that the type of protests that are going on are necessarily useful for this cause. And I would just say it is an important cause.
Yes.
But it's just worth remembering with COVID, Ukraine, Brexit, a food supply crisis possibly looming, that there has to be a level of balance. And that isn't a right-wing position. That's just, I think, a sensible position.
I agree with you, but I would say we spend far more time talking about Ukraine, about the pandemic, about Brexit, about the cost of living crisis. Far more hours of media time in particular have been devoted to those things than have been devoted to climate change. So I wonder how we keep this on the agenda. Any ideas?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I guess the only thing I would say is there have been pretty big commitments. I mean, the two major parties, Labour, they're saying if they're elected, they'll commit £28 billion a year. The Conservatives have been reasonable on some of their climate commitments, but it looks like they may go back on them. So, I would say I sort of agree with you that maybe recently it's gone out the agenda, but after COP26, I saw a lot of it. And I guess my only point is I just wish these protests were a bit more targeted at the people that could affect it rather than people that could support their cause. And also just asking for a bit of balance in the conversation. Not sure this apocalyptic rhetoric helps garner support.
Thank you, Harry, for your call. It's difficult because I can see the logic in what you're saying. And yet, how else are we supposed to convey why this is so urgent without saying, look, if we don't address this, whether or not we're at war with each other, whether there's a cost of living crisis, whether we've exited the European Union, whether we've got COVID, will all be irrelevant because humanity will die out. There's nothing more important, actually, if you think about it. And yet we don't devote anywhere near as much time to talking or thinking about this as we should, the average person. So I guess my questions are twofold. First of all, how do you win the average person over? And then second of all, these tactics, now that we know that they're not designed to make the protests or the protest groups more popular, do you think that they are actually hitting the government where they hurt, making the government sit up and pay attention as it is claimed that they do? Josh in Cambridge has texted, their highly disruptive tactics only affect working people who are left facing long queues and mass shortages. Their anger is at the protesters, not at the government. Do these activists seriously think their protests will get the government voted out, given the government have condemned these protests? It's delusional rather than targeting working people. Why don't they target the politicians directly? I'm not sure what that would look like, targeting the politicians directly, 84850, if you have any ideas on that. And Vidal has texted, a strong parallel between those who are against the initial COVID lockdown, including government. We then had to go into a lockdown totaling almost a year. The difference with COVID is a lack of remedial action will affect the younger and future generations. And many who are nonchalant about climate change have children and grandchildren. Hard to understand. I find your text a little bit hard to understand, Vidal. Do feel free to pick up the phone and call 03456060973 if you want to elaborate on it. I guess what you're trying to say is it's difficult to understand when so many people are exercised about something and their concerns are not being listened to. I'm asking you, if we're saying, and the general consensus does seem to be from the calls and texts and tweets that have come in so far, they should find a way of protesting that doesn't hurt everyday working people and gets directly to government. But I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how they can do that. And given the urgency of the situation, I'm asking what you think the alternative is. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. And Rob has called from Rochester. What would you like to say?
Hello. I first want to make sure people are aware the city was not a city. But no, I'm one of the poorest in society. I'm on universal credits. I care for my mum. I have 2 children. I can't afford to put my gas on because of these increases in prices. I pay by key and card.
Right.
And my diesel car is over at my mum's because I have to still care for my mum because my mum can't afford to pay for state care or whatever it's called. Anyway, and so I had to leave my car over there because I can't find a petrol station that's got diesel. Okay. So that's the outcome. So they are actually causing people like myself to be suffering worse than what it is, let alone the price has actually gone up again. It's now higher than what it was before the discount in rates. I understand the issue that there is climate change and whatever, but I have no physical way that I can affect change. But there is a few things which I do understand. I understand that wind turbines aren't going to fix the problem and are going to continue being a problem whilst we pay landlords £1,500 to host a wind turbine every single week.
Why don't you think they'll fix the problem?
Because, number one, it's not always windy in this country, and you have to have them at a certain height and all the science behind them. So they're not going to supply 100% of the power all of the time.
No, but they could supply a percentage of it, which would decrease our reliance on oil.
Oh, no, I don't doubt that. I don't disagree. Wind and solar, they are a mixture, but I think we're at that capital already because we're out of ideas that benefits the wealthy that are promoting these items, and nobody's interested in the science and what actually benefits this country, what type of energy that we actually create, which is a different type of electricity that has to go for a conversion when you're talking about wind and solar. But that's a whole other story.
But it's interesting
there is another energy.
That you said there, Rob, that it's wealthy people who are trying to promote the climate-saving forms of energy, because I see it that it's the wealthy who are trying to persuade us that there isn't a climate crisis and it's not a problem, and just to get our heads down and be good little consumers.
I see it from both sides. Yes, there are the gas-guzzling, super old wealth, which obviously want to continue having dominance. The new wealth seems to be more on the green agenda. So the Facebookers and stuff like that type of wealth. And either way, both of them don't do me any benefits. And by the way, I don't know if you're aware, but you are actually a part of the 1%. You own over assets of 100. Yes, because you have assets over 175%, 175,000 pounds, which is 1% of the population of the world.
Why do you think that I have assets over 175? Have you been reading one of those websites that says what my estimated wealth is? Because I can tell you they are not true. No, I don't. I can tell you that I don't.
But yeah, That's fine. I just wanted to sort of make a point.
Yeah.
Most of the radio presenters on here are within the 1%.
I take that point. So maybe I mean the 0.1% super wealthy.
I don't want to overly criticise, but there is other solutions. Like when it comes to electric cars, how do we make electric cars cheaper? Number one, let's look at the world, not just our own insular ideas of electric cars. So in China, in Norway and other countries, they're talking about battery swapping. So basically, we keep petrol stations and they just put a machine in there and change over batteries. Yes, I know that causes a lot of issues with the cars and manufacturers, but do you know what? That's what governments are for.
Yeah.
And when it comes to energy, there's the whole of Cornwall, which is a geothermal active zone. We can power the whole entire country by literally tapping into the hot rocks down below. We can also supply hot water without no gas central heating to the majority
are you talking
of the
about about fracking?
No, you don't need to frack. It comes in a similar process, but you're not actually exploding underneath. You're just drilling. So the drilling part is crucial. So you're not causing earthquakes. You're just taking the hot rock that is underneath and you're pumping water down, and then it comes up superheated, supercharged, and then it powers a turbine just like any other coal, nuclear or whatever type turbine, which gives us the exact type of electricity that we use. And then you have the other types of ways of reducing energy, which is change our ways that we actually receive energy. We currently receive 24 volts. Let's move to 11 volts, like the American system. That would decrease the amount of electricity. There is a lot of ideas out there.
And you
sadly,
sound
because I'm severely dyslexic. Yeah, because I'm severely dyslexic and because I'm oppressed by society, because I don't have those human rights, which is for a topic for another day, I am held back. I can't get the jobs. I can't get my voice out there. This is as loud as I can scream by speaking to somebody like you to actually hopefully make you look at some of the things I've said, and then you can retweet, and then you can question these green protesters and ask them why they're not talking about geothermal, why they're not talking about battery swapping, because those are the positive changes that they can do. Rob, think about me.
You sound really well informed on this topic, and I will take into account what you've said, and thank you so much for your call this evening. And you've also inadvertently answered some of the texts and tweets inevitably coming into the studio are saying, what's the point of the UK doing anything when the rest of the world isn't fulfilling its obligations? And we heard Rob there mention what Norway is doing, what China is doing. I appreciate that there are other issues of China, but what China is doing with electric cars. We can set an example and show that things can be done. And we have to be, I guess, collaborative in our approach, and that's not something that we've been great at recently. But I reject this idea that just because everybody else isn't doing it, that means that we shouldn't either. I wonder what you make of the eco-protesters' tactics specifically, because I don't think anybody's here to deny how important climate change is, how urgent climate change is. And I don't think anyone would dispute that even in spite of those things, we don't take it as seriously as we should. So taking that as a baseline, how then are people who are passionately enthusiastic about this, people who have devoted their lives to raising awareness and trying to change on this issue, how are they supposed to go about it if you don't agree with the tactics that they've employed over the past 5 days? It's 10-9, and the question that we're asking is, Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil have done 5 days of highly disruptive protests now. They've climbed on things, they've glued themselves to things, they've caused chaos on the roads, and that was their intention. They're trying to cause maximum disruption. They've told us they're not here to be popular, they're here to put this issue on the agenda. And in some ways, that has been successful because we're talking about it right now. But I can't see that it's actually affected government policy, and many have argued that it makes them less popular amongst public who might otherwise be sympathetic, and people power might be an important part of this equation. So Is there a better way, something that isn't quite as impotent as writing to your MP and starting a petition, but isn't quite as disruptive as gluing yourself to a tanker or bringing a road to a halt? Where is that third way? Where does it lie? What does it look like? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. And Roland has called from Bath. What would you like to say?
Good evening. It's I think that they should be targeting local government, so the councils, the depots, the refuse sites. If they can't get the trucks out to go and collect the rubbish, they're the ones that have got the direct communication with central government. Myself, I don't. I have to go to my MP. I have to take out time to go to the MP, and the message doesn't get across every time. Where if it's the local government that's being disrupted, they're the ones that have got pretty much a direct communication to central government.
And do you think that they haven't tried that already? Because my suspicion is that they probably have.
Well, it's not something that I've noticed in the media that, rubbish hasn't been picked up from a certain city. There's refuse still left everywhere. Once there's a health problem, that's when the government will have to step in. They will have to take notice. Okay. It's good. I get the whole process. I agree with them. But not when they're delaying people getting to hospitals. It's the everyday life that we all lead, that we have no choice but to carry on, that they're disrupting.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I should say that Extinction Rebellion, their official policy was that they didn't actually stop any ambulances from getting through when they were disrupting roads. There was one, I think, that was disrupted, but that was during a time when there were queues of 20 ambulances outside hospitals because of poor government policy, essentially. So, you have to weigh that up. But I do take your point that it feels like people are being punished for things which are outside of their control. Indeed.
I can't afford an electric vehicle. I have to rely on the vehicle that I have, which runs on diesel. As much as I would love to go to electric, the infrastructure isn't there for all of us. If you can turn it off tomorrow, stop the taps on diesel and connect up to the electric. There isn't infrastructure for it. There isn't the stock of vehicles.
Roland, thank you for your call. Julius has called from Weybridge. What would you like to say?
I'd like to say good evening and happy Easter, first of all.
Oh, happy Easter to you, Julius.
And I think I've called under a slight misapprehension, but I've been listening with one ear to your show, and I had picked up when, I think it was Rob, your caller, who was pretty eloquent on things like geothermal energy.
He was, wasn't
he? Yeah, well, he then went on to say, well, be careful what you say now, Natasha. He went on to say, we need to change from 24 volts and move to 11 volts. Which, as a trained engineer, sounds like a load of nonsense to me, because we work on 240 volts in the UK and America is 110.
Right.
But somewhat depressingly, you said to that comment, you sound really well informed.
Well, you've given me essentially the same numbers, but just divided by 10. He said 2411, you said 240, 110. So it's the same ratio, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the same ratio, but one's accurate and one isn't. And, you'll be done in if you start plugging stuff in on those numbers that are wrong. Anyway, the point being, I was phoning up to be pedantic, and then your researcher kindly put me on the spot and said, well, what's your solution? Now, I'm not got a political activism solution for Extinction Rebellion, but Rob is onto something with all these renewables. The bit that's missing in this country, because we do have natural sources of energy in terms of, as he mentioned, geothermic, but we've also got wind, we've got wave, all underutilised. The problem being that they've got mixed variability, and we've got to find ways of balancing the load. So what we should be doing at in my humble opinion, political governmental level, is investing in proper battery technologies and being world leaders and exporters of new technologies. We could repurpose large parts of the existing car sector to work on that. But there are solutions directly under our nose that are oncoming, like, for instance, electric cars, which, if they were mildly redesigned to be two-way charging and recharging, could be parked up at night at a house to charge and resupply the house and be used as storage across the country.
I think you make a good point, Julius, and that there's a lot of headlines that I have seen about electric cars going, oh, they don't work. But I just think if Henry Ford, and I know, don't at me, I know that he wasn't the person who invented the car, but if his first incarnation of the car, he had gone, oh, it doesn't work. We're just not going to pursue this any further.
They need refining.
Yeah.
And sometimes things that are designed for one thing, and in fact, this is a good basis for for funding scientific research with no purpose in mind. Sometimes things that we come up with provide a solution that we weren't intending. As I say, electric cars could well be grid batteries, when they're not actually on the road, and that would solve a lot of the problem of load balancing in our national grid.
Thank you, Julius. Only moving on because I want to squeeze in Catherine from Kendal. What would you like to say?
Oh, hi, Natasha. Nice to speak to you.
And you.
I'm very much. I think civil resistance. I'm going back to the XR, Extinction Rebellion, and Just Stop Oil. Disruption at the moment. We say disruption. Yeah. It is disruption. Basically, if the government would stop the licensing of new oil, then these disruptions would not need to happen. At the moment, we have got, I think, 8 years' worth of oil already extracted, which is going to take us, we're already at, 1.2, 1.3 degrees above pre-industrial levels. We're heading for 1.5, I believe, by the end of this decade. Yeah. Which we know already that we cannot keep it below 1.5. We might not even probably can't even keep below 2 degrees because of what's already in the pipeline. So, which is a bit of a pun there.
Sure. I see what you did there, Catherine.
Yeah, but it's just. It's almost the government. It's almost as though they're children saying, "We're not going to, because people are disrupting, because people are asking us to do this. We're not going to do it." We had the same with Insulate Britain, and it's now coming out. Everybody's saying this is the cheapest way of making sure that we cut fossil fuels, and that it's sort of social justice, isn't it, as well as climate justice. And the government is just, for that licensing, wanting to put 40 new licenses for oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. And I think civil resistance seems to be the only way history has shown us that works. You were asking to start. A lot of your people who've been phoning and got such good ideas. Well, not such good ideas. I mean, they're talking about all the different ways that we can cut back. That we can cut oil and gas and come off it completely, which basically we've got to do.
I agree with you, Catherine, and I think a really good point was made early in the hour where someone, and forgive me, I've forgotten your name, but said we tend to look back on the past with this kind of rose-tinted nostalgia, and we forget that people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and the suffragettes were not looked upon favourably in their time. They were considered very annoying and disruptive. But because we now recognise, with the benefit of hindsight, that they stood for something necessary and good, we forget all of the kind of knee-jerk reactions to the social justice that they stood for. And I think what Priti Patel in particular is doing is she's capitalising on the annoyance that some people feel about these climate groups in order to push through some really draconian legislation.